Now and for What the Papers Say.
This week, What the Papers Say is presented by Edward Pierce, columnist of the Sunday Times.
Good evening. News is all very well and quite useful in its way. It keeps the chaps in raincoats not so much off the streets as on them. It allows ulcerous men in suspenders to play Scrabble with front pages and shout hallowed words like,
Clear the lead! We're going to splash Thatcher!
But this is merely therapy for editors. We know what really counts. Where would we be if there were no columnists? The columnists will be in the company of the Czech philosopher Julius Tomin, who was quoted by the Daily Telegraph.
If they think I must sweep Oxford streets, I will do it. But I will not accept a job that is intellectual but not philosophy, because that will occupy my brain.
Dead right. That's how Bernard Levin, Ian Aitken, Auberon Waugh, and I all feel. God forbid that anything should occupy our brains. But then, there are columnists and columnists. The Sunday ones are very like fashionable preachers in the days of church-going. Like Sidney Smith, and alas, like Jane Austen's Mr. Collins, they are hired by the patrons of plump livings to gratify the parish. But it's very hard to get the best of them to stick to the text of the gospel. Neil Asherson, wonderful in my book, has a passion for long digressions about contemporary Poland and intellectual debate in the 17th century. Last Sunday, he quoted a simmering reader in Glasgow.
Week after week, he, Asherson, reminisces in purple prose with a pinkish tinge about the splendours and miseries of life in Eastern Europe a decade or two ago. Up here on Clydeside, we talk of little else.
This, of course, gives Asherson the perfect opening for a classic Presbyterian firstly, secondly, and thirdly, on the parochialism of the Scots, upon southern Scotland's dismal affinities with the grimmer bits of Silesia, and this sonorous warning to hopeful cities beyond the Elbe.
If Rostock and Rostov, Wroclaw and Volgograd think that economic reform will turn them into Paris, they are wrong. It'll turn them into Glasgow, and they should be so lucky.
Keeping up the good arcane work, he then manages to allude to
the Munich Soviet Republic in the 1919 revolution.
Clear the lead, we're going to splash Munich, 1919. Also to quote from an improving little book with the perfect Ashersonian flavour.
As Milan Semetsky described it in his book, The Restoration of Order...
That'll teach them to heckle the minister. But if some columnists are preachers, and one at least, Peter Jenkins, is running for Pope, others are kindly uncles. Bill Deeds of the Daily Telegraph is in danger of inheriting a vacated slot and setting up as Fleet Street's more incisive Walter Gabriel. He has to address himself. No way we could have avoided it.
To Senator Dan Quayle. News of his surprising and, I fear, ill-judged elevation as vice-presidential candidate reached me during a lunch hour.
There are better aperitifs.
I had had just time to lower one cold beer in the New Orleans Hilton's Oyster Bar on the strength of this intelligence before being told of Paula Parkinson, a Washington lobbyist and a Playboy nude model.
He adds the familiar charges without comment and quotes a new one, this time against the genuine war hero George Bush, supposedly shot down by the Japanese in 1944.
Now, suddenly, Mr. Mierzejewski feels moved to tell the New York Post
Bush's plane was never on fire.
it was hit. There was a puff of smoke. Bush jumped.
This is very highly skilled columnar writing, taking a couple of pieces of story, thinking about them, then with grace and economy pointing a moral to adorn a tale.
So it comes to this. The Vice President of the United States, now aspiring to be President, is not a war hero with the Distinguished Flying Cross anymore, but a coward because, according to the newspapers, he jumped from his plane when he did not have to. Furthermore, I add, his chosen running mate, Senator Dan Quayle, is a draft dodger on grounds that he used the influence of a rich family to get into the National Guard and out of the Vietnam battle.
One could argue with this. Dan Quayle is a draft dodger, but as Bill says,
Alongside charges of this order, the dirt on Dukakis, the allegations that he had once been treated for depression, seemed relatively innocuous.
indeed, it's a wonder there's an American legislator left who isn't clutching a quart of Novocaine and crooning to a psychiatrist. However, not all columnists are good and wise. Life isn't all a matter of Hugo Young improving the universe in the correct Guardian fashion, or Bruce Anderson saving South Africa for civilization and the Sunday Telegraph. It is possible to drill deep and hit pure soap.
Fergie will find that her daughter is the one person she can talk to about anything.
That's only a hint of the gold to come.
It's daughters who instinctively know when you're depressed, put their arms around you and say,
You're the best mother in the world.
and when you're feeling dull and lumpy,
It's just a matter of prose style, actually, Linda.
it's little girls who earnestly say,
I want to grow up to be just like you, Mummy.
Most children faced with the prospect of growing up like either Fergie or Linda would probably settle for going out like little Nell. However, There are horrors yet untasted. Editors occasionally hire not sense, but sensibility. Sir Roy Strong.
There is a timelessness about English life in the country during August.
There's our rolling, vacant sonority to start with. But this column, which should have the general title of Beyond Banality, slips effortlessly into the stride of a man who could snub for England.
Not everyone is on a Greek island, in a villa in Tuscany, or a farm in Provence.
Where was it this year, Roy? Benidorm or Westgate-on-Sea?
Most of us are truly at home, but with our antennae still twitching for the latest gossip.
Then we hear from the 3A's All-England mixed event freestyle name-dropper, someone in there at the edges of the Olympics.
Up our drive swings a motley collection of friends, from the Secretary of State for Wales to the actress Gabriella Drake.
Note the super subtle way he drops Miss Drake's name to impress us, and in the same instant snubs her as not quite famous enough with that little explanatory noun in apposition.
The actress Gabriella Drake.
And then he can't spell it right, just called Gabrielle, but damn accuracy, we entertain the quality.
From the vicar of All Saints Margaret Street to the Vice-Chancellor of Bristol University.
It's only just beginning. Listen to the man.
We went over to lunch with Rosemary Verry.
Never heard of her.
At Barnsley House. Having settled into her cottage ornée with a new shell-encrusted grotto by Simon Verity in her conservatory, I mused on the enormous influence that her gardeners had.
Here clearly is a rogue ego on the loose, terrorizing the blameless margins of horticulture.
I left a frightful trail at Barnsley this time, suggesting beech hedges to conceal the wilderness, moving the standard golden privets to form a new focal point in the potager,
Note the frog word, tossed in like nutmeg to give the act a bit more class.
and positioning topiary around a mulberry tree.
Wouldn't it be nice to spray him with DDT, or send him to heaven on Tyne? But then, it's the nature of some columnists to live by their excesses. Alan Watkins of The Observer is notoriously a man willing to reminisce about figures once prominent in the Labour Party who have tucked their memorial services in their belts. Paul Johnson, the Boanerges of the Daily Mail, is renowned for aorta-bursting imitations of an alco-patriotic brigadier in upper slaughter. Bernard Levin, as notoriously, talks all the time to people who aren't there, while Auberon Waugh, the porphyry jowl, dedicates his leisured mania to really seriously hating the workers and the North. They never let us down. Watkins is supposed to be talking about the current persecution of Neil Kinnock, but quickly bolts for yellower pastures.
Lord Callaghan was well treated on the whole,
And Lord Wilson?
vilified like no Prime Minister since Lloyd George. Hugh Gaitskell was reviled as a traitor to his class. C.R. Attlee was depicted as a dim, henpecked little man.
Paul Johnson comes up to scratch. And to spit.
We need to bring back John Bull as our British symbol.
Why?
He seemed to belong to a time when Britain was the top nation.
This isn't parody. These are just the random thoughts of a former editor of the New Statesman.
So let us hear more about Honest John, the man with a Union Jack vest
Waistcoat. Subtle touch of Yankee imperialism there.
and a bulldog at his heel.
What is he banging on about?
That is the spirit in which Britain should regard the roaring 80s, our best decade of the century.
Isn't he overlooking the second decade? During the First World War, John Bull was very big. Auberon Waugh, who is there to give us reassurance that nothing ever changes, especially his column, gives us the standard reading from the Book of Common Prejudice.
Those who are left in the North, for the most part, lack sufficient curiosity even to look over the fence.
There are moments when I would like to match the great orb, the Coombe Flory Terror, over 10 rounds with Jimmy Neal of Sunderland. But perhaps we should let dementia take its course. There must be people in Surrey who enjoy this sort of thing. Here's the old chuntrer dissuading Londoners from looking over the fence and invading Somerset.
The place is teeming with bats and adders.
Evidently.
Burglaries are daily occurrences. Vicarage tea parties almost always end in a stabbing, while garden fetes resemble nothing so much as the sack of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade. All in all, one can almost understand why a Cornish water authority recently decided to poison the water supply.
I think, given all these dangers in the badlands of the Quantocks, that much the kindest thing would be for Mr. Waugh to join Sir Roy Strong in heaven on Tyne. Similar anxieties about the brutish masses are described by Leslie Garner under the Changing Times logo in the Telegraph. A study reveals that
Public school girls cling to the concept of class as to the framework of a religion.
one child, Candida, who's clearly wandered in from a cottage ornée, puts it very plainly.
If we all went to comprehensive schools, you'd have to go to school where you live.
Horror!
You'd have to mix with people of the lower class, so the higher class society wouldn't exist.
Leslie Garner, who is onto something, tells us that it isn't just the proles, people like Keith Waterhouse and John Acass, who upset Candida.
I tell you something.
Candida says to the laughter of her friends.
I hate nouveau people even more than I hate the middle classes.
You know, I don't think she'd be all that happy with Auberon Waugh. Let's face it, he's a bit of an arriviste, someone who got in over the fence. But, like poor old Orb, these girls, as Leslie Garner points out, are a host of crawling anxieties.
The fear and loathing of the upper-class girls was the fear and loathing of the beleaguered class.
The war column, as repetitive as the call to prayer of a tired muezzin, is a celebration of an ancient litany, the loathsomeness of the North, and by extension, since they mostly live there, of Candida's...
People of the lower class.
Their main activities.
Complaining about life, the horrors of the weather, and the ancient dimly remembered injustices of employers, the inadequacy of pensions and supplementary allowances.
But at least they keep their distances, the brutes. It isn't like that for Candida.
Social revolution comes not from having stones thrown at one's pony, but from having some frightful nouveau seated next to one at dinner.
But that's the joy of the columnist. We have one for every social group, mania and obsession. If you hate the lower classes, you read Auberon Waugh. If you want to find out why, you read Leslie Garner. Oh, yes, and Bernard Levin. Does he really talk to people who aren't there? Of course he does. Don't you, Bernard? Don't we all? Auberon? Hugo? Bill? Good night.